Hello everyone. Today I'll be talking about the very first things you need to learn to start using R. Hopefully you've watched my last video and you already have R and RStudio installed on your computer. If you don't, I do recommend going to do that so you can follow along. If you remember from that video, one of the important points I made at the end is not to use R by typing your code directly into the terminal like this and running it and getting your outputs in the terminal. If you just type your commands into the terminal, they're going to be out of order. There's no easy way to save them, so it makes it very difficult to come back later on and reuse that code and modify it if you made a mistake, etc. So what you want to do instead is go up in RStudio to the top left here, click a new file, and create an RScript. An RScript is a text file where you can store code. And then you can run it either all together or line by line by doing Control-Enter or highlighting your code and pressing Run. And what will happen is the outputs of your code will go to the console. Your plots will be produced here where you can export them if you like. And your code will all be nicely saved into a text file that you can come back to later and edit or reuse as you want. You can also do an R notebook or R Markdown. These are useful in that they make a very nice output at the end. So if I run this, let's get that going. It will actually insert the plot directly into a document, and you can preview this. Let's just save it here on my desktop. I'll just save it as test. And preview again. And you'll see what you get is a document. This is actually an HTML document, but with R Markdown, you can make it be a PDF or a Word document or whatever you want. It includes comments, so stuff that is not code. It includes your code in special gray boxes, and it includes your plots all added in here. So this can be very nice. I tend to prefer RScripts because my code tends to be quite long depending on how complex the analysis is. And I like to have my outputs stored in their own document. So there are functions to take a plot, obviously more complicated than this, but you can take this plot and save it as a PDF. You can tile it together with other plots very nicely using functions. So I prefer the flexibility of the RScript, but I do know other people really like R Markdown or R Notebook. So be aware that those exist and use something, really anything other than typing code directly into the console. Okay, so that's the first thing to know about R. The second thing to know is that it's very difficult to look back at your code later if you don't include comments. So in an R script, there are a couple of ways to make comments. And again, a comment is just a bit of text that's not going to be executed as code. So in an R script, you can use a hash, and then anything after that will be a comment. So what comments allow you to do is tell yourself in the future what your code does. So you could say, this is code to add 2 plus 2. Now, obviously, you'll know already that that's what this code is doing because it's one line of very simple code. But you could have, 20 or 100 lines of code after this comment, and this comment could tell you what's going on. It makes it very easy to read your code in the future. It's very useful. All right, the first thing you need to know about R to get started is that you don't usually use R like a calculator by typing in, for example, 2 plus 2. Instead, what we do is we save our data in objects that have a name, and we use that name in the future to refer to the data. So in a very simple example, of using object, I could store a couple of numbers. So let's say I had an equation that's a plus b divided by c or something like that. And I had a few values for these variables. So a and b can be, 5 and 1, and c will make 10. I can store these into variables using this arrow sign, which is just a less than followed by a dash. You can also use an equal sign if you want. Either way will work. I prefer to have the arrow sign because it makes it visually easy for me to tell when I'm storing a value rather than when I'm doing a comparison. Although people use the equal sign too. Really don't feel bad. Do whatever makes you comfortable. So if I store these, I have A, B, and C. Now over here you'll see those objects have appeared, and I can do math with them. I can do a plus b divided by c. And if I change a value here and run that code, you'll see that we get a different answer now when we run this equation. Now, of course, this doesn't seem particularly useful when you're using one number per object, but there are more complex objects that can store many values. They can store text to be dealt with later. They can store tables, or even more complicated objects, and that will be the subject of a future video. So just to recap, the first things to know about R. First, don't do your analysis by typing code directly into the R console. Instead, use an RScript, R notebook, R Markdown, etc. Write comments in your code so that others and your future self can figure out what you were doing, and that you do that with a hash followed by your comment. And third, we don't usually use R like a calculator where you type in your data manually. Instead, we store the data in named objects and refer to the data by that name later when we're using it in the code. And of course, we'll talk about different types of data objects next to allow you to do more complex analysis than adding a few numbers. Hope to see you then.